Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest in recovery. I've celebrated, I'm working on 50 years, so I can't claim it yet, but it's about 49 and a half and zeroing in on the big one. So looking forward to that. The podcast is it's an effort here to try to go a little bit deeper into a couple of areas of recovery. One is on the history, kind of digging into the roots of Alcoholics Anonymous as it came out of the Oxford group in particular, what was happening, particularly back in Akron in the late 1930s. That's what really interests me. And then the psychological element. What is really going on in recovery? What are some of the things that we really have to dig into and find for ourselves? And in this particular series, what I'm trying to focus on is many groups who are challenged because recovery's difficult enough for the rich white guy, but for people who with lots of resources. But for people who are coming in who are poor, members of minority communities, members of gay and lesbian folks who are coming in, people who are challenged by depression and anxiety, things of that nature. So I want to just kind of dig into what the experience of those folks is coming into AA and maybe help some people out there overcome some of the challenges that they're faced with. And I want to welcome back my good friend, Paul S., who is coming to us from Barcelona, Spain. And Paul, if you didn't notice or know of it, he and I did a series just a little while ago, not too far back, on William James and his contribution to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's a marvelous series. He wrote a marvelous book about that. Had lots and lots of great comments on that. Again, we will put that one in the show notes. But Paul is also a recovering gay man, very open about that, and wrote a book about that. Neither of these fields is it where he makes his living. His background is very strong in economics and finance and things of that nature. So if the inflation stuff gets really bad, we may have Paul back for a third visit to give us all some financial guidance on how to get through this. So Paul, welcome back. Always a delight to have you here. So,
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, and so I'm just going to kind of pick up where we sort of left off the last time we did the introduction, some of the issues that gays and bisexual men in particular face when they're coming into recovery, and want to focus now on 3 or 4 of your chapters that have some very specific information that I think could be helpful to people. And one of your chapters deals with childhood sexual abuse among gays and bisexual men, but it's not limited to them. And I wonder if you could speak to us about that. And again, maybe as it affects the general population, and then maybe specifically as it relates to gay and bisexual men.
Yeah, sure, Bill. Thank you so much. This is an important topic, and when I myself had that happen to me when I was a boy, and so it was a vital part of my recovery process because a lot of the drinking I did was drinking about that, and coming from this contaminated family where all 10 commandments were broken and every form of abuse occurred, right? And so my first mentor, he was very clear. He said, you talk about this as often as you need to, and I encourage you to talk about it, like voting in Chicago, early and often. And he said, if anybody has a problem with that, you tell them to come talk to me. And there were some people that were uncomfortable with that, and
Sure.
But I sure am glad I did it, because I think I have sponsored like 70 guys at least, over the years, and I would say 3/4 of them had this happen to them in their adolescence,
Yeah.
and so I wouldn't say that I'm a magnet for that, but I certainly
No.
it was pretty good at helping people process it. But I do say, in my experience of the 12-step stuff, and in working in that degree in counseling at UCLA, I think the numbers are really high. I think that
Yeah.
in recovery, we're looking at 40% at least of men in recovery had experiences of unwanted sexual touching
Right.
before the age of 16. Let's call it that, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then with women, I think it's more than 50. And
Yeah.
and of course, gay and lesbians are 3 times more likely to drink and drug, and so gay people are overly represented in the 12-step movement, beyond the shadow of a doubt. When you go to meetings, you're going to see 25% of the room being gay. It's not because it's a gay meeting; it's because gays are 3 times more likely than the regular population.
Mm-hmm.
And do I think it's more? Do I think it's more common? The research says yes, and that's because gay boys are curious about it. They're wondering about it. They may be more inclined to it. They may be unconsciously looking for it. Who knows what? But there's a lot of studies from respected journals would say it probably is higher among gay boys, and of course that they're feeling more vulnerable. They're in a minority neighborhood, and it's especially true of, say, minorities among gay adolescents. Those numbers become very high. They're economically vulnerable, and so. And by the way, so many gay people are thrown out of their homes, and when they're teenagers, when they tell their parents, they may have been thrown out on the street, and so they have to perhaps engage in escorting or prostitution in order to be able to feed themselves, and so they get caught up in that world before they're adults, and so there's all this like baggage going on that would lead that number to be, I think, quite a bit higher than the general population.
You speak in this chapter about prevention. Are there some things that we could be doing that we're not doing that A, could help with prevention, and B, could help with making ourselves more welcoming to people coming in facing issues like this?
Yeah. Well, I think part of this is a strain of our conversation that you and I have been having, which I think is overdue and much needed, and that is to stop saying in 12-step meetings, outside issue. Let's, we're talking about sobriety here. Well, yeah, we are, and there's a lot of other issues that are appropriate for the room.
Yeah.
And I happen to think, because sexual abuse is so prevalent among people who are in recovery, for God's sakes, it deserves special mention.
But it's pretty rare.
Meetings.
It's pretty rare at a meeting that's going to come up as the topic. I mean,
yes, sir.
In a general AA meeting, yeah.
I think that's right. And but
or an eating disorder, eating disorders too. I mean, so many women in particular who I've dealt with a number of them in Overeaters Anonymous, and trauma.
Yeah, that's right.
So common.
Exactly.
I keep waiting to hear when's it going to come up, and it's usually not long in telling their stories when it appears.
Well, that's right. Exactly, Bill. I think that's a very fair point as well, and I think those are appropriate topics in the context of recovery from alcohol. And I think that sexual abuse is something where you hear it talked about. I would say 1 in 4 pitches you'll hear it talked about. I think it deserves a much stronger central element of attention in the 12 steps, and it should certainly not be poo-pooed or discouraged. Let's put it that way. I would come at it from that.
Yeah, and so as the general population becomes a little bit more comfortable with the topic, would that be helpful? I suspect it would, in encouraging people to talk about it. That they're going to be more welcoming. They're going to be more understanding. They're going to, it's not like this shocked reaction or some good nonsense. We don't talk about
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly, Bill. And one of the reasons I think and I've been in 12-step recovery meetings on literally 5 continents.
Right.
Literally, I've only never been to 12-step meetings in the Antarctic and the Arctic. Because I traveled a lot, and I lived in Asia, I lived in America, I've lived in Europe, I've
Right.
lived in South America, I've traveled in Africa. One thing that I would say is, you go back to one of the oldest books that we have in like our current civilization, Oedipus Rex. It's about a man who kills his father and has sex with his mother. Right. It's one of the oldest books that we have found.
Right.
That was completed, and one of the things that strikes me, right, Oedipus Rex is about the two great taboos, murder and incest.
Yeah.
And yet what is so striking in American society, when certainly when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, we have found out how prevalent all of this sexual abuse and incest was. It's exceptionally prevalent. I'm sorry.
Right.
These are what the numbers are telling us.
Right.
And so let's stop the charade that this is some extreme rarity that only happens to other people in, sort of these, in this state, right? In this state over there in the South, it happens, or something like that, But that's one of the reasons why people have such a hard time talking about this, because nobody wants to admit how prevalent it was, and it
Right.
probably is less so because society is so much more aware of it now, and we've had that problem with the Catholic clergy, and
Yeah.
now we have it, with the Baptist clergy as well. All this stuff is coming out, and so I think that
Catholics and Baptists seem to be overly represented in 12-step recovery. AA, is, that I experienced. I think there's a guilt factor that's at work. You get into this a lot in this book, how the guilt and the shame and all of that eats away at us inside, and encourages more and more of a culture of that leads to addiction.
oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that a big part of the Catholic element in the United States is the Irish. I'm half
Yeah.
Irish. My mom was from
Yeah.
Ireland.
3/4.
And they say that without the Irish, we wouldn't even have and so I think they are connected for sure. I think there's
Yeah.
absolutely an insight there. We can delve into that now if you want, but one of the things that I like to compare this to is the guilt and the shame and the feeling of failure that we see people in recovery from sexual abuse, which is
Right.
very similar to people who are recovering from battle PTSD.
Right. The veterans returning from
Veterans.
war. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very similar. Very similar. I worked at a treatment center years ago that kind of specialized in trauma issues, and that's what we could see the similarity. This was back in the early 80s, when maybe they were just starting to recognize the comparison that's going on there. Yeah, let's go through. You list 4 points. You make a statement before I move into that, which I really loved. You're quoting Michael Mead. I don't know if that's Margaret Mead's relative, but it says, where he says, every wound is like a mouth. It must speak its truth. The veterans come back and they're wounded, and the sexual trauma survivor is wounded, and they're carrying those wounds, and we ain't going to talk about it. And so the mouth doesn't get an opportunity to express the wound.
Mm. Mhm.
So I thought that was
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a few ways I like talking about it. You know, when we're depressing, right? When we're depressed, we're depressing a seat. We're sitting on the seat. We're depressing it. We're holding it down. And
Right.
I really do believe that depression is when we're holding things down and
Hmm.
refusing to allow those things to come forth. And
Yes.
to, and I used to hate these words. You know, we need to respect those emotions, right? Emotions demand respect, and if we don't respect them, they will
They come
bite
out
you in the
sideways.
ass.
They're going to come out. They're going to
The,
come out.
yeah, exactly. And
They're
so,
going to
one of
come
my
out.
great mentors was said, like it's like a box in the attic. You know, it keeps on rattling, and you better pay attention to the box. And all we need to do, which I learned in the work that we did with trauma at UCLA, especially with
Mhm.
veterans, because the VA was right next door to the UCLA campus
Right.
when people were coming back from the Iraq War in
Mhm.
2004 and 5, when I was doing this work at UCLA. You bring the box down. You visualize yourself opening up the box. The box could be my pal was killed. I survived.
Right.
My brother was sexually abused. I was sexually abused. He became a drug addict. I got better. I feel terrible. How come he can't get better?
Yeah.
How come I didn't do something to stop it? Why didn't I tell anybody? And then we close the box and we put the box away until we're ready to open up the box again. We need to take these boxes down and open them up, and open up. The first thing we talk about is, this attachment to the abuser, right? That
Hmm.
somehow we feel like we have to go back into battle, right? The veteran thinks he has to go back into battle in order to vindicate himself somehow, right? That the adolescent who was sexually abused believes he needs to go back and not confront his abuser, but to, they call it trauma bonds, right? To
Hmm.
extend that bond with the abuser. And this is one of those tragic human realities, where rather than saying something, we will do almost anything to preserve the family unit,
Oh yeah.
because we know if we say anything, you're going to blow up the family unit. And so you want to, keep people happy, and you
Right.
want to fit in.
We don't talk about those
And
things. We don't
we
talk
don't talk
about those
about
things.
those things. And Bill, I think that one of the things that psychology has really revealed about human nature in the last 20 years, there's a lot of talk about this. Margaret Heffernan, who was on the board of advisors of the BBC, beautiful book she's written about this. The extent to which we will go to fit in is
Yeah.
gobsmacking. We will do almost anything to fit in.
Right.
And if that means being gay, I have to shun being gay and tell people I hate gays in order to fit in. We're willing to do that. If we have to tell people that my family is perfect, no matter what, we will say that in order to fit in with my family unit. If I have to go to church and say that nothing about me is gay in order to fit in, fine, But
Right.
that has a huge cost, and the same is true with the veterans. The thing that struck me, Bill, about this book when I wrote the book was that, when I began, reading about the wounded warrior movement among combat veterans,
Right.
the extent of PTSD is something between 13 and 20%. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had rotations into
Yeah.
Iraq, Afghanistan, other parts
Yeah.
of the Middle East, and,
Yeah.
and millions of people in the LGBT community. There aren't enough therapists in the world for all these people.
Right.
And so the communities need to come together. And
Yeah.
that's the point that I made in this book. And I was
Yeah.
looking at what the wounded warriors were doing with each other
Right.
in order to help each other overcome PTSD, because there simply isn't enough therapists and trained social workers to do this. And so that's where the book goes in some of
Right. In Native American culture, there was a cleansing period that the warriors needed to experience before they were welcomed back into the
it. Mm,
community. There was a transitional state, sweat lodges and ceremonies and things of that nature, where the warrior energy and the accumulated traumas and guilts and such that they were let go of before they would be safe, both for them and for others, to welcome them back into the community. I think we learned that somewhat, with the Vietnam veterans, that we didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to say thank you for your service. We learned that much from that war and violence, but to really provide them with a safe space where the natural cleansing can happen, we don't do that.
No, it's a great point. It's a really great point, and I think that the for everything that we know, I think the general treatment of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans is just about as shabby as it ever has been, and because we're just looking at the numbers, and the numbers are pretty horrible in terms of the prevalence of alcohol and drug addiction,
yes,
rage, divorce,
homelessness,
unemployment, right, and so forth are off the scale.
Yeah, yeah. My son had 2 tours in Iraq in the Marine Corps, so we went through it, from a distance with him, and he's still dealing with it. He's getting help, but man, it comes up. It comes up for all these men and women too. We as a culture just we're faced. I find myself with the thing that just happened in Uvalde. I don't want to look at it. Comes on the news, I turn it off. Like, go away. I don't want to see it. I don't want to face it. And you talk and look at Ukraine. My God, and Syria. I mean, the kind of traumas that are being inflicted on whole populations over there.
Yeah,
we'll
yes,
be
sir.
dealing with that for generations and generations.
Yep. No, one of my interns is dealing with it now. He's Ukrainian American, and he had to go to Romania and pull his family out. And he had to stop everything in his life and go there and take 2 months to get his family out from, and his family is from the East.
Yeah.
And so they had to go across the country in a train with one suitcase, and their whole life is completely gone. So that's right. I think we're going to be dealing with this for quite some time. And if we return to sort of the similarities, a couple of comments I would make is I couldn't stop the bad person from doing what they did to me on the battlefield, what they did to me,
right,
as an adolescent, sexually. One of the things that I've done, which has been life changing, is EMDR, which is eye movement.
Yes.
Desensitization, and it was really earth shaking for me, and it was able to approach my old trauma in a new way and to reconfigure my understanding of what happened. It's really remarkable. And as you and I talked in that book called "The Body Keeps the Score," which I learned has been like on the New York Times bestseller list like for 100 weeks in a row. It's a remarkable book. It changed my life. Right. And it's written by the guy who ran the trauma center at Boston General. Vanderkolk is his name. He's a Dutch doctor. Beautiful stuff. And the stuff that he talks about in there is the being aware of the physicality when we're talking about trauma, to sort of gently tap our thighs, a lot, 15, 20, 30 times when we're talking. It brings us back into our body because we want to escape and we want to disassociate ourselves from our body, because those memories are in our body. I tell people to take their shoes and socks off and put them on the floor and feel the rug, feel the carpet. Yeah. And I always ask them, I said, what size shoe did you wear when this was happening to you? And they're going to say, whatever, a size 5, a size 6. What size shoe do you have now? 10.5. Look at those feet. Those are the feet of a man who can take care of himself. And the person who was wearing size 5 shoes back then could not take care of themselves. You can take care of yourself now. And that's what we need to do as adults, is to take care of ourselves, create safe spaces for where we can have a healthy, productive, loving relationships with the people around us, and not to be thinking of sexual activity as something that you need to be punished for, something that is
Right.
bad, something that where there's going to be consequences if you get caught, because all those memories remain, and that causes people to act out in very unhealthy ways. Public sex, for instance, is a very common one, for instance. And so, and I think that goes for veterans as well. Totally,
Yeah.
right? Where the veterans dissociate from their bodies because of
Right.
what they experience physically in
Right.
their own body being wounded, or in the body of their best friend who is either dead or severely wounded, and integrating the body and
Yeah.
the mind and the spirit into some sort of coherence and some unity,
Right.
some
I've heard
wholeness.
a lot of particularly sexual trauma survivors talk about leaving their body when the
Mm.
sexual act is going on, and it's like psychologically they're up on the ceiling watching it happen. The dissociation that is just kind of part and parcel with it. My primary abuse was physical violence. You know, experience in my family, beatings and that kind of stuff with a drunken father. And when I came into recovery, I mean, it was the same thing. I was not connected to my body, you know. Felt my body immune from things like, I mean, people would point out, I got sober in Detroit. It was, 15 degrees below zero, and I'm not wearing a coat. And people would point that out to me. Hey, Bill, it's freezing. I can take it. It's doesn't affect me. Hell, it doesn't. You got
Yeah,
a chapter.
yeah.
You got 2 or 3 chapters. Conscious of the time, that I really want to get to.
Oh, and
One,
Bill, Bill, let me say something before you go on.
yeah, sure.
I was reading about this last week. I was reading an article about progress they're making in
Yeah,
PTSD with soldiers. Listen
right.
to this. One of the things that was causing this huge jump up in the incidence of PTSD with soldiers was when they were asked, "Were you physically or sexually abused?" And somewhere between 15 and 60% of the soldiers who were experiencing PTSD said yes. And so,
Mm.
so these experiences of adolescent abuse hugely aggravate the prevalence of PTSD. I was really struck by that, and I was struck, and I'm glad they have these numbers where they can start to address these issues and connect them together.
Right. And two people can go through a traumatic event, and it can affect one person more deeply than the other. It's amazing. I mean, I got 2 sons. The son who became the Marine is probably the most sensitive of my 3 kids, the most sensitive.
Mm.
I mean, it's just like his feelings are right there. And so the effect that the war had on him might be compounded versus my other kid, whose son was more intellectual and kind of in his head. But the other kid's just out there feeling it. So he got hammered. You got a
Yeah.
chapter. You have a chapter on the divided self. It was a kind of a flashback to William James, but I think it's really significant in this trauma work, and this sense of a divided self. And I thought, it really wasn't original with James. I thought of Paul and his letter. The good that I want to do, I
Mm-hmm.
don't
Yeah.
do. The evil that I want to avoid, I do. Who will save me from this madness? I mean, there it is. There's these 2 selves. Letter of James, not William, but in scripture that was very popular with the Oxford Group people. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And so it's this inherent sense of dividedness that is kind of endemic to the human condition, that is
Yeah.
compounded now with trauma survivors. That we need to heal it. We need to well, heal is probably the best word, and it's a process. It's nothing simple. It's going to take a long time for most people.
Yeah. To address it, to go at it head on.
Right.
So one of the things that I was so there's a guy, Sidney Gerard, a Canadian. He was a very beautiful writer. He was a therapist. He tragically died in a freak accident fixing his car, unfortunately, when he was very young, in his 30s. But he was a beautiful writer and a beautiful speaker. And he made a beautiful point, Bill. He said, if I suddenly find out something about myself, and the next day I'm going to wake up and someone's going to call me by my name, and I'm going to think, who are you calling? Whose name are you calling? It's not me, right? And so the coming out process is quite alarming and frightening, because suddenly this person called Paul that I've been called for, it took me a long time to come out. I came out when I was quite older, when I was like 27, 28, and suddenly when I'm this person who's gay and I can't tell anybody, but people still call me by the same name, it's confusing and it's frightening. And I have to find a way to integrate that. And, the way that I do that is to tell the truth to the world, to the people who are calling me Paul, that there's something about me that's important to me, that I hope you understand, and that I hope you can still like me or love me or want to be around me if I tell you something that I consider to be a shameful and dirty secret, because I've been told that by society, by being Catholic, and in my family, and so forth. And so the next level of this has caused me so much angst and anger and sadness and dissociation. I want to blame somebody. Somebody should be blamed for me being a fractured self. And that's where a lot of the rage of they call it the velvet rage. There's a wonderful book called The Velvet Rage of the LGBT community, which can be quite bitchy and biting. And I think there's a lot of that bitchiness. Believe me, I'm speaking because I'm speaking out of my experience of being around people like that. Right. I've had A-list parties in Hong Kong or wherever in California, and I hear a lot of bitchiness, and it's because people feel like somebody put me in this corner. I'm a fractured self. How come I can't blame anybody? Who's responsible for me being marginalized? And so I think there's this fractured self is something that's very deep in the LGBT community, for sure.
But sometimes, and you make this point, it's like you can maintain that fractured self for just so long, and then there comes a collapse, which is also an opportunity. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, exactly, Bill. Exactly. And I think you described my experience as well when I was getting cleaned up, because I was just drinking too much, and I never really did drugs. And so in my case, there came a time when I had to get cleaned up, and I was in a men's group, and I told the whole men's group, I'm gay. And that was so hard for me, because there was like 40 men in the group, and it was a straight men's group. And I said that I'm gay, and it was really hard. And afterward, people were like, congratulating me, and I was like, I didn't do anything. And so there is that, and even that event, caused me to have. And by the way, I was in my late 30s at this point, and I couldn't believe how much of a lifting off my shoulders this experience was, because I'd been living in Hong Kong for 10 years, and Hong Kong at that time was a very conservative place. It was the British.
Which in prison was it against the law?
Yeah, it was
against the law.
You can go to prison for it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And people I know did. They were arrested for the silliest things and thrown out or put in jail. And so when I came back to California, that's one of the things that I had to confront, was that history of really coming of age in Asia, in Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, very conservative societies where the whole topic was still taboo, and I think to even some extent it's still taboo today, because you can still go to prison in Singapore for it. It's still a felony.
Well, you can go to prison in Singapore for chewing gum and spitting it on the sidewalk, can't you? I mean,
things like that.
It's a pretty tough community there. You've got a section that I want to go through. I want to make sure we have time for it, because I thought it was very significant. And you start off by referencing two individuals who have something to teach us. And they are William James, who we've explored somewhat in an earlier series, but we'll do it again. And also Viktor Frankl. And I have a friend who is kind of an expert in Frankl's work, and I want to bring him onto the podcast one of these days. I'm still working on that. But why these two men? Back to the divided self piece that they're both kind of dealing with. They're both getting underneath what's going on inside, kind of ripping the scab apart, going into the wound and seeing what's operating there. So maybe Frankl in particular, why was he important for you?
You know what? I just finished that wonderful biography of William James that you gave me, and then I read Man's Search for Meaning. I did my thesis for my degree at UCLA and Loyola Marymount. I did my thesis on Viktor Frankl.
On Frankl.
Yeah, but both of those men were trained psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, and both of them were coming at their work. I'm convinced now, especially after reading that biography, William James and Viktor Frankl were both writing to heal themselves. Right. They were both writing to find insight about, how do I live? How do I find meaning? Why should I not kill myself? Viktor Frankl and William James were exactly asking that question. Why do I want to keep living? And that was exactly, very explicitly, right, Viktor Frankl's Search for Man's Meaning. He wrote it in 1946, right after he left the concentration camps, and he was asking himself, how come so many people gave up life and died? They chose to die, and what caused people to live? And one of the things he said was, in unnatural circumstances, an unnatural response is completely natural. And so we have to pay attention to the kinds of things that people coming into recovery from extremely unusual circumstances, we're doing quite unusual things. And so we need to give it a lot of context.
His book, Frankl's book, was very helpful to me in my first year of recovery. Because I could look to him. Things were not good in my life. Okay. And I look around myself, things are not good. Okay. I knew that. It's true. Yeah. But I'd read Frankl and I feel like a wimp compared to what he was dealing with. And he was able to find meaning and purpose in circumstances where he's facing death. Imminent death, family is killed,
wiped out,
wiped out, and he's helping people find meaning above everything else. There is you can get through this. It was an amazing man, and logotherapy is it's still got a great deal to teach us.
Indeed.
Meaning and purpose is so important. Let's go through. You list as a good 12-stepper. You come up with 12 things that are to be learned through dealing with gay, bisexual, trauma, all of these different issues. And I want to go through them because I think it's a very helpful list. And number one, let me read them to you in summary, and then if you would just comment, I think that would be probably the most helpful way to approach this. Number one is the way of suffering, that there is, quote, no way to escape suffering in life. And yet we try, don't we?
Yeah, there's that old saying, suffering is inevitable, growth is optional.
Right, that's right.
We can grow, we can suffer, or we can grow and suffer a little bit, but really grow.
Right.
And so there's just, I was talking to a dear friend who's a medical doctor, and she was telling me that she started her residency as a medical doctor in December 2019, just in time for COVID, and she was going through a very messy divorce. And she said, so much of my whole life was challenged. And she said, I felt like Job, because I felt like, I'm suffering so much, but I was going to church and I was doing the right things and I was faithful to my husband and I was a good doctor, and yet my life fell apart.
Right.
And I told her, you know what? All of us are Job. We are all Job. The suffering is visited on everybody. It rains on the just and the unjust. All of us are Job. That's the deal in life. If you want fair, forget it. Right. But the key thing is, we do this together. We do this as a group. We can choose to maintain an attitude of hope. Because I wrote some poems about this. Actually, I wrote a book of poems about this a couple of years ago, and you know this so well, Bill. The Hebrew word for prosecutor is Satan, and Satan is the prosecutor who's always there telling us, "Don't worry, forget about it. Don't try. Don't have hope. People are bad anyway. Bad stuff's going to happen. Suffering's always going to be here. So give up." And
come over to the dark side. Come over to the dark side.
Exactly. And so the opposite is that maintaining a sense of hope, maintaining a sense of what Viktor Frankl and William James chose to do in their personal lives, as well as in their beautiful writing, self-forgetfulness to work with others as a way of healing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what the 12-step movement is all about.
It's what it should be about. It ain't just about not drinking and drugging, it's about the deeper healing that has to go on. The second one you talk about is forgiveness of ourselves for what happened. So important. So important. I have an internal critic who is not forgiving, that voice.
It's the same one I have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's
the committee.
Well, this guy's chairman of the board. So when he comes in, he just nails me, and it's merciless. It's merciless, and it's exaggerated. It has nothing to do with reality, and I think that's what you're getting to here. An abnormal reaction. You said this earlier. To an abnormal circumstance is normal. If you've been living this way, and brought up in this way and dealing with all of this stuff, you're not going to get through it in a day or a year,
Right.
And so the need for self-forgiveness is critical. And I guess especially so, I think with gays and lesbians and the bisexuals, again, it's very human, but it has to be dealt with. So
amen, brother. And putting yourself on that list, putting yourself on the step 4 and step 5 list of people I need to forgive. I think that is just so critical. People who say don't put yourself on there, I don't think they know what they're talking about.
No. I agree. Number 3, we often come to a moment of self-despair, but that's also a moment with the potential for a moment of grace. And you have a quote: his moral death is his spiritual birthday. The collapse of the ego system and this is, I think, gets back to the divided self. That division that I'm carrying, it just can't go on. Hopefully there comes a crisis, which is an opportunity to change, or get back on the cycle. We do have the choice. That's one of your things that's going to come up later. But
that's the whole theme of the William James book, is what you just said in like 3 minutes, in three sentences. You just nailed it. That's the whole theme of the varieties of religious experience, and how and why that happens, and what do we do after it happens, and what's the process for reconciliation.
Right,
is exactly what our 6-part series was all about.
Yeah, and it's the death of oneself and the beginning of another self. Not the same. Not the
our
same.
lower self, we jump onto a higher power, even if for a moment, as our lower self is falling to pieces. I love that.
Yeah. And then stay long enough for the process to have its effect. I've said this before on this podcast. I was an alcoholic, and I was a runner. And I knew, the only thing I knew about God's will for me when I finally did get sober was don't drink and don't run. The pain was there. And it was like, well, you know how I deal with pain? I get the hell out of Dodge. If you get the hell out of Dodge, you're going to die. You have to stay. And that was the difference. I mean, I sure as hell wasn't happy, joyous, and free instantaneously. It was, I'm willing to endure the suffering long enough for it to have its effect. And I only got that by watching other people in whom it had happened. That's why Frankl was so important for me, because again, I'm a wuss compared to him. So
Now, and when I got cleaned up, I got a house in LA. I did gardening for 2 years. I just did the gardening every day for 2 years. And then after that, Bill, I got to tell you, I never wanted to do gardening ever again. But I learned about myself by going to meetings and, gardening, and that's what I did.
Right. Frankl says we need to arrange a meeting with this inner self. And you say, if we reach for this inner self, it will reach back to us as a source of strength. Comment?
Yeah, I think that it's interesting that you bring that up in particular now that we've had our time together with, varieties, because, that seems to be, I never thought of it, but that seems to be exactly where William James was coming from, that this higher power is, the kernel of this higher power is this higher inner self, which is very likely hidden in our subconscious, and it comes to the conscious fore during moments of crisis.
Right.
And this is what Viktor Frankl is saying as well. And William James was writing in 1902, and Viktor Frankl was writing in 1946. And I'm sure Viktor Frankl was aware of William James, but probably wasn't in that school. Because he was, I think he was basically
Freudian.
Working in German, writing in German, and I don't think he spoke English very well at all. And so he would have been familiar with it, but not that familiar.
Number 5, this reaching out to an inner or higher self has a feeling of detachment to it. Can you explain that one? And what I got from that paragraph in there was that Jung says that the ego always experiences an encounter with the self, capital S, the God image. It always experiences it as a defeat. It's like initially, okay, I'm done. There's a death that has to come. It doesn't last, but it has to come. I think you have to experience that, and that becomes the opportunity for that inner self, capital S, to assert itself in my life and connect with me, and then begin to pull me towards something. That's the higher power.
I kind of like rather, yeah. I kind of like the concept of the surrender rather than the defeat, because surrender is the definition of surrender, especially for like alpha male John Wayne culture
Right.
Americans. They don't like that, but I say, you know what? The definition of surrender is. Surrender is going over to the winning side. How's that one? How do you like that one?
Right.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. It's a realignment. It's a realignment.
yeah, it's a realignment. And I tell
Yeah.
people, Napoleon had one standing order: when alone and unarmed, surrender is permissible. That
Right.
is when you should surrender. You need to surrender. When you're alone and you are unarmed, surrender.
Yeah.
And those two things together, I like it.
I do too. I do too. The need for confession and forgiveness. And maybe let's go back to maybe for the gay and lesbian group, maybe in particular. Well, what's that about? So you
Well,
said last time, be getting honest,
getting
yeah,
honest, and
yeah,
cleaning up, and righting wrongs,
right,
and looking at my part in failed relationships,
right,
and very importantly, very importantly, when I was sexually abused, or when anybody is sexually abused, there is no fault in that. When you're under the age of 16, there is no fault.
right,
The problem, and where I need forgiveness, is what did I do as an adult with that? Did I go on a life
right,
of thinking of sex as
right,
forbidden, illicit, worthy of punishment? And so
hmm,
did I go down the drain of sort of whatever, S&M, kinky,
right,
anonymous sexual encounters? That's very common, and that's when you think that sex is bad, boy, guess what you're going to do?
yeah,
And there's that joke, is sex dirty? And the answer is yes, only if you do it right. But that albatross that hangs around the neck of so many LGBT people is,
right,
I'm bad, so I have to do bad things with sex,
yeah,
and that's just not true. Sex is a beautiful, beautiful gift.
yeah.
And my mentor,
Yeah, the church hasn't been very helpful in that regard, has they?
very destructive, very
Very
destructive.
destructive. Very
But
destructive.
my mentor was a Jesuit, and he said, look at the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs. That is one of the books of the Old Testament, and it is a beautiful book about a
Oh yeah.
God who has given sexuality to his creatures because he loves them and for them to enjoy it. And so there's a lot to be said for the Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon.
Yes, I was reading Bernard McGinn just recently, who's probably the preeminent scholar when it comes to the mystics. And he said it's that is the book in scripture that most of the mystics have commented on. Isn't that
Huh.
interesting? It's not John, it's not love. It's that physical kind of embrace from God, whoa, whoa.
Yep.
Very, that was enlightening to me.
Yeah.
You referenced James in number 7, that joy and serenity are the proper outcomes of a spiritual experience, not pain and suffering. You know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
fruits. It's back to the fruits, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. And there's a beautiful line in the Varieties of Religious Experience where William James says, he said, look around at the rafters of our universe. Look what has been built. Look at the stars. Look at the sky at nighttime. Look at the blue in the daytime. Look at the beauty around us. How could a
Right.
God who's counting sins have built this? And I just love that. I love that image, and
Yeah.
also, Teilhard de Chardin, one of the great Jesuit archaeologists,
Right.
said that joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. I like that a lot.
And where I've kind of gone recently, and I've done a lot of studies on the book of Job and Jung's answer to Job,
Uh-huh,
which
uh-huh.
was, I mean, I come from the dark side, as you know, so I'm kind of attracted to that stuff. Life is so painful. How do we make sense of
Uh-huh. Yep.
this? And it's that God is in relationship with man, not detached, and from a distance watching the suffering. But at some level, and this is, I guess it was Teilhard de Chardin, that there's an evolutionary quality that's going on, not just biologically, but spiritually as well.
Yep.
God and man are doing business together.
Yep.
And God is evolving. Hang on, literal fundamentalists. They're just going to turn me off right now. But God is evolving as man towards man, as man is evolving towards God. We have business with one another. I think the Eastern Church is much more the deification, of man. It's much more common on that side of the world than it is in the Western Church. Well, that's another.
Yeah, and William James makes that point. He said, who knows? He makes it toward the end of the book, and he also references it in the footnotes after the talk, because he's very clear. He said, look, who knows? How do we not know? Maybe we need to lend a hand and help out this God of our understanding, this higher power. We need to tilt the bar here. And I was so blown away by that, because I'd really never heard of that concept before. And of course, that just means that William James was on this way before Carl Jung.
That's going to take me to number 9. I'm skipping 8, but you're so onto 9. We come to see that our suffering has a higher purpose. That's what you're just talking about right there. Our suffering has meaning.
Yeah, right.
Not that we're choosing it, not that we're asking for it, but it can either beat us down to nothing. And to those for whom that happens, I understand, but some are able to find meaning and purpose within the suffering. And go ahead.
I was going to say that the ultimate message of the 12-step movement, I think, is the one sentence: no matter how far down the scales we have gone, we will always see how we can help another person, recover from a hopeless, state of mind and body. And I think that is all about something that I reflect on a lot, which is, the suffering that we endure is so that we can bear witness. And that's all I got.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And
we bear witness with a good attitude and optimism and positivity that humans can change and endure and love, no matter what.
So the code is what? Love and service. And love is going to crack you open. It ain't this Valentine's kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that's going to really go down to the center of where we live, crack us open, and change us.
Yep. And clear the decks.
And out of that comes service.
Yeah, indeed.
Greater sense of unity, at this kind of looking out at the world now. And so, so it's not that I'm gay and I'm unique, or I'm a veteran and I'm unique. We're all in this thing together.
Yeah.
And that's part of the transitions. Don't hang on to that specialness. You gotta face it. But don't cling to it. Don't cling to it.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's right. I'm a believer in LGBT meetings. It doesn't need to be a bunch of groupies, right? But I do believe in LGBT meetings.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I went to this is in Detroit, my first year sober, all African American meeting, 75 people there. I was the only white guy in the house. I swear to God.
So you were terminally unique.
No, well, but here's the deal. I felt so different going into the meeting. After an hour, I came out of the meeting, when we held hands in the circle, and I felt that unity.
Oh, that's cool.
I had
That's great.
transcended it.
Yeah.
I had transcended
Yeah.
it, you know,
That's
and
great.
they had transcended it with me. And I think that's
Yeah.
what you're talking about in number 11, or 10, I guess it was, the sense of unity, all made from the same clay.
Yep.
You don't
We're all
deny,
made from the
you don't
same
deny
place.
the difference,
Yep.
but you can transcend the difference,
Yep.
you know, and that's what we have to do as a species. We have to learn to do it, or we're doomed,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know?
And I think that the word that we're looking at here is inclusive, it being inclusive.
Exactly.
And right now we're going down a road of exclusivity and tribalism in the world, and
It's growing. That's
it's
right.
growing. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, I like this 11. We each have a story to tell, which is our story alone. Again, sometimes I'll hear in 12 step, you know, he's terminally unique. Well, I understand what
Yeah.
that means, but there's another side to that. You are unique, and it does make a difference whether you get it in your story or not. You
Yep.
know,
Yeah.
that's why there's billions of us. We
Yep.
each an opportunity
Yeah.
to overcome the stuff that's been handed to us. Some more severe than others, but each in his own way has it. You know,
Yeah.
so we
Yep.
have a chance. And
Everybody counts or nobody counts.
that's it. That's it. And then finally, you say we come to a place where we know we have a choice of our own attitude, hope and salvation, or darkness. And this is related to freedom. You make a big point of that there is freedom, the will, you know, I have a choice, moment to moment, actually, I have a choice. And, and in every moment can make a difference.
Yep. And Satan, you know, Satan, Satan, the prosecutor, that's the word in Hebrew, is out there telling us every day, it's not worth it. Don't have hope. You know, just give up. You know, and the opposite of that is hope and love, and bearing witness to possibilities. I think that's what we have to do in a very dark time right now in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it makes a difference as to how we handle that. So, Paul, once again, I really want to thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and hope to all of us. It was very, very helpful. Again, the book I will put in the show notes. Encourage you to read it. If anyone wants to reach out to Paul.
Yes, it is Paths to Recovery for Gay and Bisexual Drug Addicts.
Okay.
Roman and Littlefield, very good publishing company in Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. I hope this series is going to be helpful for you, and I hope this episode or two with Paul open some doors for you in whichever way you needed to have them open. So, Paul, thank you once again. It's always a delight having you on the podcast. So,
thank you so much, Bill. You're great. Thank you so much. You're a star.
All right, keep saying that. Keep saying that. I love it. Quiets that little voice inside that says exactly the opposite.
I know. I hear you. I got it.
All right, everybody, take care. God bless, and do keep coming back.